Welcome Part 8. The Hogwarts Express came to a grinding halt at Hogsmeade Station and hundreds of Hogwarts students began to disembark the Scarlet steam engine. Harry was hand in hand with Susan as they stepped onto the train platform together. Harry's heart filled with warmth as he heard the familiar call of Fur's Years. Fur's Year over here please. Harry turned and saw the looming shadow of the Hogwarts gamekeeper with his bright lantern waving to the new students to join him for the boat ride to the castle. Harry had a flash of himself and Ron only a few years earlier being awed as they followed Hagrid down to the boats. It seemed like a lifetime ago. Come on Harry. Susan smiled, tugging him along with her. Harry followed his girlfriend towards the line of waiting carriages, each tethered to two thestrals. Harry no longer feared the strange creatures but found that he now felt great respect for the beasts. Before he joined Susan, Hannah, Neville, and two fourth-year Ravenclaws in the carriage, Harry stopped to give the closest beast an affectionate pat. Susan took Harry's hand once again when he sat next to her in the carriage, and didn't release him until they had to part inside the Great Hall. She gave him one final peck on the lips before following Hannah to the Hufflepuff table. Harry followed Neville, and the two boys sat down across from Ron and Lavender. "Where's Hermione?" Ron asked. "I thought she'd be with you lot." "She's was with Zach." Harry shrugged. "I'm sure she'll be along soon enough." It was only another minute before the bushy-haired witch joined her friends at the Gryffindor table. Smiling brightly. "Did you take care of Zach's Raxpert problem?" Harry asked with a smirk. "Shut up," Hermione replied, slapping his arm. She was trying to look angry, but she couldn't stop herself from grinning. A moment later, McGonagall led in the first years to be sorted. Harry and the others at the Gryffindor table cheered loudly whenever someone was sorted into their house, just as the other houses did the same for the new inductees. When the sorting had finished at last, the golden plates filled with food, and the feast began. "So, another song about joining together," Ron said as he tore into a roast chicken leg. "We won't win this war by standing alone." Harry shrugged. "But how do we join together? None of us trusts anyone in Slytherin, and they aren't too fond of us either. You know, I've wondered about that," Hermione said as she cut into a potato. "They're pretty isolated. You never see Slytherins with any of the other houses. They keep to themselves all the time. It's odd. I mean, yes, they hate us on principle. But why don't they associate with Ravenclaw or Hufflepuff either? An unsolvable mystery," Neville concluded. "I'd like to know how this stupid feud started," Harry said. "It seems like it's been going on since time began. I told you when we first met that Slytherin has a reputation for turning out dark wizards and witches." "But dark witches and wizards could come from any house, Ron," Hermione countered. "I know, but the worst ones have always been from Slytherin. And because of that reputation, once someone sorted to that house, the rest of us begin to mistrust them. So we're all to blame," Lavender said. Ron turned and gave his girlfriend a smile, which she returned. "Seems really stupid," Hermione said. "But I have no idea how to change it. Even if we alter how we think of them, it won't change how they think of us," Harry pointed out. "You never know." Neville smiled confidently. "Things always change. All you need is one person willing to open their mind." When the last crumb had been devoured, Headmaster Dumbledore rose from his seat to give his start-of-term speech. Everyone fell silent as Dumbledore gazed upon them all. "To our new students, I say welcome, and to our returning students, welcome back. I have only a few start-of-term notices to give to you before I release you to the warm comfort of your beds. First, as always, the Forbidden Forest is exactly that, forbidden. Also, Mr. Filch has asked me to tell you all that any product from Weasley Wizarding Wheezes is banned. You can of course see the full list of banned items on Mr. Filch's office door. I am told it is now quite extensive. Anyone wishing to play on their house Quidditch team should see their team captain to find out when tryouts will be held. Also, I would like to tell you that a new club will be open to all students this year. For those interested in more defense against the dark arts and dueling, please see Professor McGonagall to sign up. Harry gave a sigh of relief. He didn't really want hundreds of students hounding him to be allowed into the defense club. Dumbledore had anticipated this and given the responsibility to the head of Gryffindor House. Harry also noticed Snape's lip curl slightly at this announcement. Now I would very much like to introduce our new potions teacher. Professor Horace Slughorn. Slughorn rose from his chair as the students applauded him. Harry noticed that Slughorn blushed slightly. Professor Slughorn will be taking over for Professor Snape, who will now be teaching defense against the dark arts. Harry turned to watch Snape rise to accept his applause, of which there was little, most of it coming from the Slytherin table. However, Snape did not stand. In fact, to Harry's immense surprise, Snape actually looked upset. "Why do you think he looks so sour?" Hermione asked. "He's wanted that position for ages, and now that he's got it, he looks like he wants to vomit. No one's lasted in that job for more than a year." Harry replied. "It's not a reward," Ron said with a small satisfied smile. "It's almost like he's being punished. And now, it is time for bed. Classes will begin tomorrow, and it will not do for you to be unrested." Dumbledore smiled, raising his arms to dismiss them. The Great Hall was a cacophony as students began to head to their common rooms. Susan found herself being forcibly steered into her dorm room by Hannah, with Sally Ann and Megan Jones hot on their heels. The door was shut, and Susan turned around to find the other three girls staring at her expectantly. "Spill it, Bones," Megan said, going to her bed and hopping up onto it. "What are you talking about?" Susan asked, a little confused. "You're not going to get away with the innocent act here, Susie," Hannah said with a mischievous grin. "Everyone saw you two all cozy on the train and the whole school's talking. But we know there's more than what everybody else is talking about, and I know that you have been with Harry non-stop since after your birthday. We haven't gotten a chance to share, so I'm asking you now, what did you and Harry get up to?" "AHH. Susan said, now understanding what the three girls were after. They wanted all the juicy details of her intimate relations with the Harry Potter. She gave a sad little shrug as she crossed to her own bed and began pulling out her sleepwear, which was little more than a camisole and some shorts. "Sorry girls. But unfortunately Harry and I did not get time to snog. We had only 2 real good kisses, one of which happened last night after you lot left." "Wait?" Megan asked, looking hurt. "You had a party and didn't invite me. We sent an invitation. But you never responded," Susan said. "I'm just pulling your chain." Megan laughed her musical laugh that always made the others begin to giggle. "I was in Italy until just this morning." "Please continue. Are you honestly telling me that in 2.5 months you only kissed him twice?" Sally Ann said, looking indignant. "What is wrong with you? How could he keep his hands off of you is what I'm wondering," Hannah said. "After the way you practically threw yourself at him, nearly naked I might add." "He saw you naked?" Sally Ann asked, eyes bulging. "No." Susan shook her head. "I had my swimsuit on. It was similar to the one I was wearing yesterday." "Good call, by the way." "I imagine he was trying hard to keep his wand from poking you." Hannah giggled. Susan smiled, but her cheeks turned the color of ripe tomatoes, and Hannah fell over with laughter. He was poking you. She squealed. Susan could only nod. And the other girls began to laugh as well. It isn't funny, Susan said irritably. He must have been so embarrassed. You could have been a sweet girlfriend and helped relieve him. Megan smiled, waggling her eyebrows. I think I made it worse after you all left. We sort of started snogging on the sofa, and I felt it between us, and I freaked a little. I knew what it was, but I was afraid my aunt might have walked in on us and I don't know. Susan said, sitting heavily on her bed. There's nothing wrong with that, Hannah said, finally calming down. Go at the pace you're comfortable with. If he gets pushy, hex his bits. I don't think Harry's the pushy type. It was more what I wanted to do. I just kept having these feelings, and I wanted to do more than just kiss him, and when I felt his manliness between us, I got freaked out a bit. I don't know that Harry needs to be distracted, Susan admitted. He's kind of got a lot on his plate. No kidding, Megan agreed. What's with all this chosen one business? It all because of the fact they were fighting Death Eaters in the ministry, Susan said. It doesn't mean anything. Did he ever tell you why they were there? Sally Ann asked. Susan shook her head. Forget that, Megan said. How did you even start dating him? I can't think of any time where you said you fancied him. When we left for holiday, you were still pining over Zach, who I noticed was quite close with Granger still. Yeah. Well, Susan stammered. She and Harry had never come up with a story on how they came to be dating. They had agreed not to speak of the contract, but they hadn't discussed a cover story to explain to people why they were together. Oh, come on, Susan. Hannah rolled her eyes. Fine, I'll tell them. Hannah then spun a tale about how Harry had been nurturing a huge crush on Susan, and near the end of the previous year, had tried to talk to her a few times. Susan noted that Hannah had taken the few spare nuggets that Susan and Harry had lamely muttered at the end of summer party and wove a rather romanticized tale of Harry and Susan coming together with much encouragement from Hannah herself. Why was Harry at your house when it got attacked? Sally Amy asked. He was staying the night, Hannah said quickly. We got back really late from our date, and Harry's house isn't connected to the flow. So Susan's aunt sent a letter to Harry's relatives, and made him stay the night. Lucky she did too, or we might not be here talking to you about it. Was that your new house we were at yesterday? Sally Ann asked. No. It's Harry's, Susan said quickly before Hannah could respond. A few days before all of that, Harry found out he'd inherited a house from his godfather, and he said we could stay with him until the school year. Wait. Megan said, looking perplexed. I thought you said his house wasn't hooked to the Flow network. If he had his own house, why didn't he go there after your date? We didn't go to his house right away. He was still living with his relatives the night we were attacked. We stayed with them for a few days while Harry got things together at his new house. Susan lied almost flawlessly. Hannah gave a confirming nod. His relatives just let him leave? Sally Ann asked skeptically. They're not nice people, Susan said, shaking her head. She remembered meeting the Disleys on their date and how horrid they had been to Harry. They seemed glad to be rid of him, Susan said. He won't talk about it, so I don't know much more about it. To be honest, I don't know that I want to know. So you're all alone in his new house and you didn't have your way with him? Megan asked, truly appalled. Like I said, Harry's got a lot going on. And there was a bit where we really weren't getting alone. But that's all behind us, and I think now we can get closer. I really think all the bad hard stuff is behind us. I should think you'd like the hardness in front of you. Sally Ann smirked. Or in you. Megan blurted out and began to laugh. Sally Ann and Hannah joined in, and even Susan giggled a bit at the innuendo. You're kind of disgusting. You know that? Susan asked, climbing into bed. The girls continued talking for another 2 hours about boys and what comes naturally when girls and boys get together. Megan shared a thrilling tale of 2 different boys that she met and got to know very well in Italy. It wasn't a secret between the now 6th-year Hufflepuff girls that Megan was the first of them to have experienced sex. Megan herself had told them all the day after it had happened. It had been only last year, and had happened with the Hufflepuff keeper, who'd been a 7th year. None of the other girls had been awfully surprised at all. Given the increasing tension within the 5th, 6th, and 7th years. As Hannah had said on the train home, it had been a very sexually charged year. Susan was sure that this year was going to be similar, if not more so. Susan wondered idly as she listened to Megan go on about allowing a very handsome boy named Armand, or something like that, to get his hands into her knickers, and the amazing things he had done to her, just what she and Harry might experience. With their new extended curfews, they had a bit more time to find a good quiet, private place in which they could be alone and perhaps become more intimate. She had to smile when she thought about the previous evening and the way Harry had tried to hide his excitement for her. He really was one of the sweetest boys she had ever known. Are you joking? Megan shrieked, breaking Susan from her musings. Hannah was blushing terribly and shaking her head. You total slag. Sally Ann said vehemently. Wait, what? Susan asked, now perplexed. Hannah was laughing hysterically, her face buried in her pillow to hide her redness. Did you know? Sally Ann asked, turning to Susan. Did you know she did that to Neville? What? Susan asked, now becoming more curious. What did he do? What did he say? Megan asked. Did he try and stop you or anything? Hannah nodded at the last question but was still laughing too hard to answer. You are such a tramp. Megan shouted gleefully. How did you like it? It was all right. I just imagined it was a popsicle, like Kathy Bennett said last year. It was better than I thought because Neville's kind of a clean freak. But it was nothing compared to what he did to me. Hannah said, muffled by her pillow. We'll just say he returned the favor. No, he didn't. Sally Ann said, now quite disbelievingly. No offense to your boyfriend, but I didn't think he even have a clue about. Oh, trust me, he does, and he was amazing. Hannah sat up, her face still a deep crimson. Though her eyes were a bit glazed over, and Susan noticed she was rubbing her thighs together. He told me he heard Seamus talk about it enough, he was sure he could pull it off, and I'm telling you as sure as I'm sitting here that it's true. He did it beautifully, and my legs shook for 2 days afterwards. That boy knows how to use his tongue. Susan finally understood what they were talking about, and had puzzled together what Hannah must have done to Neville. She was shocked, and her hands went to her mouth as she stared at Hannah, who looked extremely wound up. I highly recommend getting your bloke to learn how to do it. You'll all thank me. Preaching to the choir. Megan reminded them. Do none of you remember what I told you about Deacon in the locker rooms last year? Oh my God, how come you didn't tell me before now? Susan asked. Her hands still covering her mouth in awe. I wanted to, but there was way too many people around yesterday and today, and I wasn't about to bring it up with him sitting next to me. He would have freaked out. He's not unlike Harry in that he's a pretty private person. Hannah explained. I just can't believe it. Susan said. When did it happen? About a week ago. I went to visit him, and his gran was gone all day. So we were in his room, and one thing led to another, and the more we kissed, the more I wanted to do more, so I did, and then he did. And I'm not sorry about it? Hannah said proudly. Wow. Sally-Ann said, looking at Hannah with awe. I'm so surprised that Neville Longbottom is that good in the bedroom. How big is he? Megan asked suddenly. Hannah held up her hands, with a very pleased look on her face. The other girls seemed impressed as well. That's bigger than Deacon was, good for you. Megan smiled. What did it feel like? Sally-Ann asked. Okay, I'm putting a stop to this. Susan said suddenly. We have classes in the morning, and I don't want to spend my night dreaming about Neville's wand. I wouldn't mind. Megan grinned, and Sally-Ann nodded in agreement. No. Susan said adamantly. Though she was having trouble keeping herself from smiling. Hannah, you're the damned prefect, shouldn't you be the one ushering us to bed? Who am I to deny my friends what they want to hear? Hannah smirked. Ugh. You're all filthy disgusting harlots, you know that right? Susan shrieked. All three girls nodded with big grins on their faces. I'm going to bed. Susan threw her hands up, and climbed into her bed, shutting the curtains. And casting a silencing charm so she wouldn't have to listen to her friends go on about how well Neville was built. She didn't need that imagery when she was trying to picture how her own boyfriend was put together. She had a decent idea from the previous night, but she was still extremely curious. What made Susan smile was the fact that she knew she would be finding out in time. As she snuggled into her pillow and shut her eyes, she made a mental note to ask Hannah just what it was she was supposed to do should the situation arise. Ron and Hermione had to patrol the castle, keeping an eye out for any start of term rule breakers, while the new fifth-year prefects guided the first years up to Gryffindor Tower. Harry and Neville followed the procession up the moving staircase, commenting to each other about how neither of them could remember ever being so small. Neville had to tell one of the straggling first years to pay more attention, or they would get lost. Hey Harry. Katie Bell said as she and her best friend Leanne came up beside Harry and Neville on their walk. So, I heard you're the new Quidditch captain. Congratulations. Thanks. Harry smiled proudly. I thought for sure it'd be you who got it. I won't lie. I was hoping I'd get it. But the more I thought about it, the less I actually wanted it. When are you going to be holding tryouts? Probably in a week or so. I don't want to wait too long for it. The sooner we fill all the slots, the quicker we can get to practice. Can I give you a bit of advice? Katie asked, and Harry nodded. Hold tryouts for every position, including mine. Don't just let me on the team because we've worked together for years, or Ron because he's your mate. You could be missing out on some really good flyers. I'm not saying that I don't want to play, but if you found someone better on a broom than me. I don't think that's going to happen. Harry smiled. I don't think so either. But if I had been given captainship, you would be trying out all the same, even yours. Katie said seriously, and Harry understood. I'll think it over. Thanks for the advice. Harry said gratefully. Anytime. Can I ask you something else? Katie started to look a bit nervous. Sure. Is it true that you're with Susan Bones? Katie asked, her voice had dropped in volume. And her cheeks flushed with color. Yeah. Yeah, we're together. Why? Harry asked puzzled. Oh, no reason. Katie tried to wave it off, but her best friend wasn't going to let Katie off as easily. Because if it wasn't true, Katie wanted to ask you to be her boyfriend. Katie's friend grinned, talking across Katie. Leanne. Katie shrieked with humiliation. What? Harry asked startled. Really? They had stopped walking now, and Harry, Katie, Neville and a chuckling Leanne were standing together just outside the portrait of the fat lady that hid the entrance to Gryffindor Tower. Katie turned to look at Harry now, still blushing. Yeah, she finally said. Since last year sometime. I thought for sure that you'd still be unspoken for at the start of the year, and I planned to find you on the train and ask you, but I had no idea where you were. Then I overheard someone say that you were dating Susan Bones. Oh. Was all Harry could get out. I'm sorry. It's all right, Harry. Katie smiled. I should have asked you out last year after I heard you and Chang had imploded. Well, if things between you and Bones don't work out, just know that I'd like a chance with you. Katie's face was nearly glowing scarlet as she and Leanne passed through the portrait hole and into Gryffindor Tower. Harry turned to Neville, who appeared just as confused as Harry felt. What just happened? Harry asked. Neville shrugged, but began to laugh. Harry shook his head, and he and Neville entered into Gryffindor common room. They both said hello to a few of the fellow Gryffindors before heading up to their dorm room where Seamus Finnegan and Dean Thomas were already unpacking. Hey Harry, Dean said upon seeing his roommate. Have a good summer. Of course he did. Seamus smiled. Haven't you heard, the lad was staying with the fair Lady Bones this summer. How do you know that? Harry asked. I didn't know for sure until you just confirmed it. Seamus grinned. And Harry rolled his eyes. Neville laughed and shook his head, heading to his bed and opening his trunk. So it's true you fought Death Eaters over the summer again? Dean asked. Harry nodded slowly. The Prophet actually got some of that right. Harry, you could not give me enough gold to switch places with you. Seamus sighed. Mind you, I wouldn't mind having a bit of your stock with the ladies, but it isn't worth all the rubbish you end up facing. Thanks, Seamus. Harry said wryly, shaking his head. Wait, what do you mean stock with the ladies? Clueless. Dean rolled his eyes. But that's part of what makes it work. Seamus grinned. The thing is, it's gotta be genuine. You can't fake it? Trust me. What are you lot talking about? Harry asked, getting irritated. All right, it's like this mate. Dean said, taking a seat on his bed. It started around the Yule Ball, though Seamus thinks it goes back to our first year. You are the standard by which most of the birds in this place compare us blokes. Seamus interrupted. There are exceptions, of course. What are you talking about? Harry was now very confused. Okay. Seamus said, sitting next to Harry on Harry's bed. So, I keep my ear to the ground a lot, listening to see who's interested in who and all that, because if I hear some bird finds me fanciable, I can make a preemptive strike, and get things going. You follow? Harry nodded, and Seamus went on. Now, you've always been a hot topic of conversation, but ever since before the Yule Ball. The tone of those conversations have changed from what kind of trouble you might be causing to how hot you were getting. Last year, you should have heard some of the things girls were saying about you. I heard a few seventh years discussing making you a man, if you catch my meaning. Oh, he does. Dean laughed. Pointing at Harry's crimson hue. Harry's eyes were as big as cauldrons now as he stared between Seamus, Dean, and Neville. Why didn't anyone say anything to me? Why didn't any of these girls talk to me? He wondered aloud. I have the answer to that. Seamus smiled, and Harry threw his hands in the air. Of course you do. We never mentioned it. Because quite frankly, well, why should we help you get some action when we could be focusing on our own attempts? Plus, to be frank, You and I weren't on the best of terms last year. Don't worry about it. As I recall, I was a bit of an arse to you as well. Harry said easily. And Seamus clapped him on the shoulder. The second answer is that almost every girl I've ever heard talk about you in that manner all agreed on one detail, which I agree with. They were all worried about scaring you right off. Painfully shy are the words I always heard. Dean added. Intimidating too. Don't forget that. Neville said. Right. Seamus nodded. Wait, you knew about this too? Harry asked Neville, who shrugged. Honestly, Harry, would it have mattered if you had known? Seamus asked. Those girls were all correct. You're intimidated by the fairer sex, and if some bird had come along and been forward with you, it would have freaked you out, and you would have run away. He's done okay with Susan. Neville said. And Seamus nodded. But I bet she didn't throw herself at him. I'm guessing she eased our little Harry into trusting her before she ever did anything of a romantic nature. Actually, that's pretty accurate. Harry said. Though he did recall Susan being pretty overt on their first date. He smiled softly as he remembered the way she had launched her scantily clad form into his arms in the pool and how glorious her body had felt pressed against his the previous night. Seamus grinned as he stood up. I for one would like to thank you, Harry. If you were more confident, there would be no girls for the rest of us. Glad I could help. Harry rolled his eyes. So what the hell is with Snape getting the defense job? Dean asked. Changing the topic. Dumbledore must want to be shot of him. Seamus grinned. Everybody knows that position is jinxed. I'm hoping for a beheading, personally. I'd like to see him done in by his own hex bouncing off someone's shield. Neville sighed. Too quick for my liking. Dean said. Something really slow and horrendously painful. That's my vote. Boiled in his own slime, Ron suggested as he entered the dorm. That's my vote, hey Ron. Seamus smiled. How in the bloody hell did you manage to convince Lavender to be with you? What do you mean? Ron asked, looking confused. He wasn't sure if he should be insulted. I've tried for 2 years to turn that girl's head my way, and she always snubbed me. She always said that she didn't want anything serious. She wouldn't even let me take her to Hogsmeade. Wait. But what about those rumors that you two got together in the astronomy tower? Neville started, but Dean began laughing. He started those rumors. Dean howled. I didn't mean to start those rumors. Seamus said quickly. Truth was, I convinced her to go up there with me so I could ask her out. For like the 7th or 8th time. I thought, you know, moonlight, warm spring night. Set the mood. Everything got blown out of proportion, and she got really mad at me when she heard the rumors. So nothing ever happened between you two? Ron asked. No, mate. Seamus stated. Not for lack of trying. But she just never gave me a chance. So how did you do it? Ron could only shrug. In all honesty, I don't know. The thing is, she kept coming to my brother's store where I was working, and we would take lunches together. We just talked. A lot. I asked her to come to Harry's party at the end of summer, and she asked me if it was a date. I told her it was just a party, and that it didn't have to be a date, and she asked if Parvati could come. So I didn't think it was anything until just after we got to Harry's. Wait, you guys were all snuggly last night. I thought you were together. Neville observed. By then, we were. It got made official not long after we got to the party. In the water, actually. Ron said with a shy smile. We were a bit away from everyone else, and she swam up to me and put her arms around me. She leaned in and kissed me and told me that she'd wanted to kiss me all summer. I didn't know what to say. Oh man. Seamus said bitterly as he flopped onto his bed. What did you say? Harry asked. I said that I liked her. And that I thought she was one of the best looking girls in the school, but that I had no idea she liked me like that. She said that had been the idea. She wanted a chance to get to know the real me, and that if she had let on that she might like me, she was afraid I would either. Ron began to laugh a bit now. Act like Seamus and fall over myself trying to get her attention, or run away. She really said that. Seamus looked up, and at Ron's nod began punching the side of his head. Stupid, stupid, stupid. He kept repeating, making the other boys laugh. So that was it? She asked if we could make a go of it, and I said. I believe my exact words were hell yes. Good on you, mate. Seems like Seamus is the only one of us without a girl now. Dean smirked. Which reminds me. Ron said, looking hard at Dean, who cowered a bit. I'm not going to play the overprotective brother thing here, Dean, but I will just tell you that if you hurt Ginny, when she's finished with you, I'll get the rest of my brothers. And we'll be having a discussion to make sure you know just what you did wrong. Cool. I have no intention of hurting Ginny. Dean said easily. And to be honest, I'm more afraid of her than you and you brothers combined. To be honest. I am too. Ron said, going to his trunk to prepare for bed. Anyway, that's all I wanted to say on the matter. From now on, it's none of my business. Wow. Harry remarked. What? Ron looked at his best friend. Nothing. It's just I always kind of pictured you stalking whoever Ginny wound up with, or accompanying her on dates to make sure nothing got too far. I talked with her a lot over the summer. Ron shrugged. I gave up my right to be like that in her first year when I all but ignored her. Ron's face darkened, and Harry knew Ron was referring to the business with the diary and the Chamber of Secrets. He felt a stab of guilt as he remembered trying to avoid her for fear of making her become embarrassed. Harry wondered if he had acted differently that year, if perhaps his feelings for the youngest Weasley would have been different. Would they had in fact been a couple? What would have it been like to discover the marriage contract while he'd already been dating someone? Harry grimaced inwardly as he tried to imagine having to break up with someone and resenting Susan all because of the contract. Harry counted himself very lucky that they had both been without significant others in their lives when the contract surfaced. It would have most definitely complicated an already difficult situation. As Harry climbed into his bed, and the lights were extinguished. Harry closed his eyes and pictured Susan lying in the sun in that stunning blue bikini she'd been wearing the day before. And what the bare flesh of her midriff had felt like when he'd been holding her as the sun set. He began to dream of what could have happened between them when they had begun kissing on the sofa after everyone had gone home. The first day of class dawned bright and warm with nary a cloud to be seen. It appeared as if summer had every intention of remaining for as long as possible, and it was felt in the hearts of every student within Hogwarts Castle. Even the early risers were a bit lax in getting out of bed. The Great Hall normally saw a general trickle of students as early as 6 in the morning. But no student was seen until nearly 7:30 when there was a flash flood of bodies intent on filling their bellies. Susan and Hannah were among those in the first wave of breakfast seekers. As they sat down, Susan felt a pang of something she couldn't readily define, though she knew it came from the fact that her boyfriend was not to be seen yet. They had not discussed the possibility of eating together, and Susan wondered if Harry would even want to sit with her. Coming back to school, Susan realized, had presented a vast set of incidental problems that had never occurred to either she or Harry during the summer. Then again, Susan reminded herself that she and Harry would likely be eating meals together for the rest of their lives. Also, Susan knew their relationship was still in its early stages. She really didn't want to become some overbearing control freak. She just didn't think Harry would like that, and Susan knew she would hate it if Harry were that way with her. Susan comforted herself with the knowledge that they would figure things out as they went. "You've got admirers," Hannah said as she took a bite of toast. Susan, who had been lost in her own thoughts, looked up in the direction where Hannah had indicated. There were a few fourth-year boys who quickly turned their heads when she had looked up. "They're so cute when they think they haven't been caught," Hannah quipped, and Susan smirked. "Kind of weird that they're looking at me," Susan said, and Hannah rolled her eyes. "Sus, they've been staring at you since you got your boobs." The blonde smiled. "But, I think you're going to be getting a lot more attention because, number 1, you've stopped wearing your usual braid, and 2, you're dating Harry Potter. Girls want him, guys want to be him. I wouldn't be surprised if you get a lot more boys flirting with you, and at least 50 death threats." "I don't think anyone's going to threaten me," Susan scoffed. "You are now the most beloved hated witch in this school," Hannah said earnestly. "You are the envy of nearly every girl in this school. You landed the most eligible bachelor in our lifetime. You don't think you won't get death threats?" "You're being ridiculous," Susan replied. "Fine. I'll make you a wager. If you don't get at least one death threat, and I mean a real I want your head on a platter, by the end of the week, I'll run through the common room starkers," Hannah said confidently. "Oh, please don't let her get any death threats." Ernie Macmillan smiled as he and Justin Finch Fletchley sat down. "I'd give anything to see that," Justin replied, grinning broadly. Hannah simply shook her head at the boys. "Correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't you and Sally Ann start dating just a couple of nights ago?" Hannah cocked an eyebrow. "You really shouldn't be wanting to see another girl naked." "I can look, so long as I don't touch." Justin smirked and Hannah just rolled her eyes. "Well, don't get your hopes up. I'm very confident that Susan will get at least one by the end of the week." "What if she does?" Ernie asked interestedly. "What will she have to do?" "Good point." Hannah smiled, turning to her red-headed best friend. "I'm not getting starkers," Susan said adamantly. "I wouldn't make you do that anyway," Hannah replied, slightly hurt-looking. "Not for these idiots anyway." "Hey," Justin and Ernie said together. Hannah leaned into her best friend and whispered something into Susan's ear. Susan's eyes bulged impossibly large and her cheeks burned scarlet. "I don't think I could do that." "You practically did it over the summer," Hannah argued. "Do you not remember that it was you who got us all to go swimming that day?" "That was different." Susan tried, but Hannah was having none of it. "I saw the two of you together, and I know that you want to." "You're lying to yourself and me if you try and deny it. If you really think that no one will threaten you over being with Harry, then you have nothing to worry about. I'll be the one streaking the dorms." "All right," Susan said, throwing up her hands in annoyance. "Fine. No one will get hurt either way, and I really think you're off your tree for thinking anyone would threaten to kill me over my boyfriend. So, fine, what are the exact specifics of your bet?" Hannah turned to Ernie and Justin and smiled. "Okay, so there is no bias, these two monkeys must witness it. And it needs to be a clear threat upon your life. Harry's name also must be mentioned. We have until Friday after dinner. If at such time, no threat has been made, I will go into our dorm, undress. and return to the common room where every one of our housemates can get a very good look at my stunning figure in its natural state. Susan was laughing hard now, while both Ernie and Justin seemed to be lost in their own imaginations. If, Hannah continued, no threat is issued by that same time, you will have to do what I have mentioned to you. What will she have to do? Ernie asked, almost pleadingly. None of your business. Hannah replied quickly. And, I will want proof that you did what you were supposed to do. What kind of proof? Susan asked, a bit worriedly. Hannah thought for a moment, then a smile spread across her face and she once again leaned in and explained her plan to Susan in whispers. This seemed to placate Susan and she agreed. The two girls shook hands and continued to eat. Ernie looked to Justin with a grin. I think this year's going to be way more interesting than last year turned out to be. Oh yeah. Justin nodded. Professor Sprout handed out schedules and Susan and Hannah compared theirs. The two girls had different careers in mind, and knew that beginning in 6th year, they would not always be in classes with the rest of their housemates. It was evidenced at once when they saw that while Susan would be taking potions, Hannah would be having runes. Susan looked up to see if Harry had entered the Great Hall yet, and found him with Ron, Hermione, and Zach. Susan felt a bit of irritation that Zach was with his girlfriend, but Harry had either been too clueless to come find her, or he hadn't wanted to be with her. Suddenly Harry got up from his seat, just as McGonagall handed him his schedule, and began to make his way towards her. Good morning, he said as he walked up. Late start? Hannah asked as Harry sat down next to Susan, who was quickly forgetting her irritation. She noticed that his hair was still damp from his shower. We all kind of stayed up a bit late last night, Harry admitted. I forgot that we could eat wherever we like. Zach and Hermione reminded me. Susan found she couldn't really be angry with him. After all, she hadn't gone looking for him either. It was then that Susan noticed something else. Where's Neville? Probably in the greenhouses. Hannah smirked. He's been helping Professor Sprout since 3rd year. He gets up extremely early nearly every day to go to the greenhouses and take care of a lot of the rarer specimens. I'll see him, don't worry. What's your schedule like? Harry asked, and Susan showed it to him. We have a lot of classes together. Harry smiled softly. Susan looked over the schedules and saw they had potions together that morning, but Harry would have defense in the afternoon while she had herbology. The rest of their schedule for the week showed they had transfiguration and charms together. Guess that means I can count on you as a study buddy. Susan smirked, and Harry nodded. She leaned in and kissed his lips softly and quickly. We should get moving, Hannah said, looking at her watch. I don't think we should be late to class on the first day back. We should wait until our 3rd day for that sort of thing. Laughing, the 6th years rose together, and began making their way to class. Hannah waved goodbye at the entrance hall as Harry and Susan, now joined by Ron, Hermione, Ernie, and Justin, began heading to the dungeons. Clearly the new potions teacher is allowing you in his class, Susan quipped. McGonagall told both Ron and I this morning we're clear to take the class. I didn't think I'd get in, Ron muttered. I don't have any of the supplies. I'm sure Professor Slughorn will loan you everything you need, Hermione said with a confident smile. They weren't the first ones to class. Padma Patil and Mandy Brocklehurst were already lined up along with Anthony Goldstein, and to Harry's immense displeasure, most of the 6th year Slytherins, including Draco Malfoy. Harry and Draco glared at each other, but before the verbal battle could begin, Professor Slughorn opened the classroom door with a huge smile on his very round face. Ah, eager to begin I see. Well, come in, come in. The students filed in, and Slughorn told them all to gather to a table. Several more students entered, and when the class bell rang, Slughorn shut the door to begin the lesson. Well, well. Very good. Now, I would like to take roll call so I can match names and faces, and then we will begin. Slughorn called out each name on his registry, and each student replied in kind that they were present. Harry and Susan shared a table with Hermione and Justin. Ron had been caught off guard when Lavender showed up just before the bell rang, and the two of them took the next table over along with Padma and Mandy. I thought there'd be more Ravenclaws, Harry whispered. Susan simply shrugged, while Hermione threw him an annoyed glare. Harry smiled. He knew how Hermione hated people talking during lessons. All right then, Slughorn said, closing his attendance book. You have all come here because you've chosen a career that will require an advanced knowledge of potions. By show of hands, how many of you are choosing to become healers? Susan, along with Mandy, Anthony, and Ernie all raised their hands. Slughorn smiled and applauded. Healing is one of the professions that relies heavily on potion making. I am sure you all know that there is quite a bit more work in potions during your medical education. Now, are there any potential Aurors among us today? Slughorn asked. Ron and Harry were the only ones who raised their hands. Slughorn looked unsurprised yet quite happy at the same time. Yes, I should have guessed. He grinned. You will need to pay close attention when we study antidotes and poisons later this term. As for the rest of you, there are many careers that use potions quite extensively. Or perhaps, you simply wish to become a potions master like myself, or Professor Snape. It is not an easy task, but extremely satisfying, as well as lucrative. I wish the best to all of you, and if you ever have questions regarding your particular interests in the potions universe, my door is always open. Now for today, T have concocted a few very special mixtures for your perusal. Let's start with this one. Slughorn motioned to a cauldron that sat upon the table that Draco was sitting at. Inside was something that looked like boiling water. Hermione of course knew the answer, and her hand was in the air in the blink of an eye. Yes, Miss Granger. Slughorn smiled, arching an eyebrow. It's Veritaserum, Hermione said at once. The most powerful truth potion known. Indeed. Very good. 5 points to you, my dear. Now, can anyone tell me what this one? Slughorn was now pointing to a mixture that sat in front of Theodore Nott. Hermione's wasn't the only hand in the air this time. Both Harry and Ron recognized the mud-like concoction at once. Slughorn was grinning broadly as he pointed to Harry. Polyjuice potion. Harry responded. Yes. Very good. Take 5 points. And now to this one. The cauldron was sitting on Harry's table, and Slughorn reached between Hermione and Ernie to remove the lid. At once Harry's nose was filled with several wondrous scents that he recognized almost at once. Vanilla was the most prevalent. He could also smell something like apricot, and something similar to suntan lotion. In summary, all scents Harry ascribed to Susan. He turned to her, and found her smiling at him strangely. They weren't the only ones making silly grins. Most of the class had silly smiles on their faces, and Slughorn was chortling now. It's Amortentia, Hermione said. A very powerful love potion. The most powerful, my dear. Slughorn corrected. It is recognizable by its mother of pearl sheen and characteristic spirals of steam. While Amortentia can create feelings of passion, it is not true love. Though it is not a banned substance, it can be very dangerous. It make the drinker become dangerously obsessed with whomever the focal point of the potion. Sir. Padmapadil spoke up. What is that one? She was pointing to a small cauldron upon Slughorn's desk where liquid gold seemed to be bubbling and splashing as if it were alive. That is the prize for today's work. It is called Felix Felicis, or better known as liquid luck, Hermione stated. Indeed. Slughorn cheered. This wondrous little mixture will make the drinker extremely lucky. Extremely difficult to brew, and disastrous should you get it wrong. Felix Felicis will ensure that succeed in any endeavor you embark on, at least until the effects wear off. Why don't people take it all the time? Ron asked curiously. Too much of a good thing. Slughorn said simply. While a wondrous potion, if taken too much it can make you giddy, reckless, and dangerously overconfident. Imagine if you will taking it before you climb a mountain, and the effects wear off halfway up. You'd find yourself in a life-threatening predicament, and could be killed. Slughorn smiled. The class was on the edge of their seats. It is also highly toxic if taken in large quantities. Slughorn continued. Have you ever taken it, sir? Justin asked, and Slughorn got a very glazed look in his eyes. Twice in my life. 2 perfect days. Everyone sat in silence as Slughorn thought fondly of his 2 perfect days. He shook himself and smiled at his students. And so, I offer 1 vial to the person who brews the best example of draught of living death by the end of today's lesson. You may begin now. Never had Harry seen such a scramble to get started in potions before. While Harry knew that he didn't stand a chance against the likes of Hermione, he wasn't about to give up. However, Harry was surprised by Susan's talent. She and Hermione seemed to be nearly equal at potions. Harry had not ever had a potions class with Susan, and had no idea of her capability until now. It was also clear that she knew a few tricks, likely from having an aura for an aunt. While Hermione was trying to keep her Sophophorus bean steady so she could cut it as instructed by their potions book, Susan was using her knife to crush the bean. Harry saw that Susan's method was much better as the shriveled bean seemed to be overflowing with sticky purple goo. How'd you do that? Hermione whispered. Susan smiled, and showed Hermione with a second bean, which she took from Harry. Harry scooped up as much of the bean's goods on his knife and stirred it into his potion. Susan was the first to reach the stirring stage, with Hermione right behind her. Harry joined them a few minutes later. Slughorn was prowling the room glancing at each student's work, offering suggestions as he passed. When he came to Harry's table and peered into both Susan and Hermione's cauldrons he was quite impressed. I may have to award 2 vials today. He beamed. Very impressive, ladies. Very, very impressive. At the end of class, Slughorn had to do just as he had predicted. Short of testing the potions on students, Slughorn had to admit that the 2 girls' work was incredible, and he could not tell on sight or sniff which was the superior work. And so, he poured a bit of liquid luck into 2 vials, corked and sealed it and handed one to Hermione and the other to Susan. Use it wisely, he said, and then dismissed the class. Both Hermione and Susan were smiling superiorly as Slughorn dismissed the class. Harry couldn't help but be in awe of Susan. He'd never taken potions with Susan before and had no idea just how well she could brew. As Susan turned to kiss Harry goodbye before she headed to the greenhouse, Harry whispered that it had been very much a turn-on to watch her brain at work, making Susan blush hard. Harry, Hermione, Neville, and Ron headed to the Defense Against the Dark Arts classroom after lunch ended. Harry had really enjoyed having lunch with his girlfriend. It was very different from when he spent time with Cho Chang, whom he had seen glaring at him from across the Great Hall. It was so strange to him that he felt this fulfilled and happy. As he thought of the way Susan had reached up to ruffle his hair during lunch when he'd made some comment, he felt his scar tingle strangely again. It passed before he could really contemplate the sensation, however. As Harry and his friends rounded the corner talking animatedly about what they might put together for their first day meeting, Harry grimaced when he saw that they would be having this class with the Slytherins as well. The door was opened already, so all the students went inside and took seats. The class was gloomier and more foreboding than Harry had ever remembered it being before now. The walls were decorated with grotesque pictures of mangled bodies. There were jars of dead things, or parts of what Harry thought were once some kind of creatures on the wall behind the teacher's desk, and the general air of the class felt foreboding and dark. Harry felt tainted as he followed his friends inside. Unsure of what kind of lesson they would be having, all the students had their books and wands out in anticipation. People were whispering to each other in anticipation of what arguably the most hated teacher in the history of the school might be teaching them. A second after the class bell rang, Snape stormed into the class, cloak billowing behind him, the door slamming shut as he entered. His demeanor as cold and sinister as ever. "Wands out, books away," he said sternly as he marched to the front of the class. "Over the last 5 years, you have had 5 different teachers, each with their own unique teaching style. As such, you are woefully behind in this subject. It is my job to attempt to teach you how to defend yourselves, a difficult task for anyone, as the dark arts are ever-changing and eternal. Never think yourself a master of defense. There is always someone delving deeper into the dark arts. As it stands, I find myself stunned to see that so many of you manage to scrape even an acceptable in this subject thus far." Snape was staring at Neville. To Harry's and many other people's deep shock, Neville kept the former potions teacher's gaze. Neville's face remained like stone, showing not even an inkling of the trepidation many expected of him. Harry wondered if their excursion into the Ministry last year had tempered his fellow Gryffindor. Harry turned back to see Snape actually quirk an eyebrow. "This year, we shall be studying some very complex defensive magic, and 50% of your grade will depend on your ability to cast all your spells silently. Is there anyone in this classroom who can tell me the advantage of casting wordlessly who is not named Hermione Granger?" Harry felt his anger rising within him as Hermione's hand fell. She had it raised before Snape was even finished his question, and now she looked as if Snape had just slapped her. "Mr. Malfoy," Snape called on the blonde Slytherin, who was smiling superiorly at Hermione. "Your enemy will have no idea what you're about to cast, giving you an advantage." Draco sneered, eyeing Harry. "Take 10 points to Slytherin," Snape said, turning to the rest of the class. "In a duel, you should use every advantage you have, especially if you are not a competent spellcaster. There is no award for second place, and your enemy will not be kind. In a real battle for your life, nobility is a weakness." Snape was now looking at Harry, who held Snape's gaze. He had no intention of putting up with Snape's taunts or insults this year. Harry did take Snape's advice, however. Harry knew he was far too noble for his own good. "I am given to understand that you are all at least familiar with how to cast a disarming hex. You will divide into pairs and practice disarming one another. If I hear anyone speak the incantation, it will be detention. And to make sure there is no cheating, you will pair off with someone who does not belong to your own house." There was a wave of confusion from both Gryffindors and Slytherins. "On your feet!" Snape roared, and everyone was up. Snape waved his own wand and the desks disappeared and 2 lines appeared down the middle of the class. Harry and the other Gryffindors lined up on one side of the room with the Slytherins on the other. Harry stood across from Tracy Davis, who was looking very determinedly at him, her wand raised at him. Harry gave a slight nod and raised his own wand. Harry knew the disarming spell very well, but he'd never cast it silently before. Apparently Harry wasn't the only one who was having difficulty. All through the classroom, students were turning red in the face with concentration, or in Neville's case, biting their lip to keep from uttering the charm. Harry felt it would be wise to focus on disarming Tracy, instead of looking at his fellow sixth years. He didn't think it would go over well if Tracy managed to disarm him first. Tracy kept moving her wand, usually ending with a stabbing motion right at Harry. Once he thought he felt his wand slip a little from his hand, but so far the Slytherin was getting no results. Harry kept his wand movement much more subtle, choosing to put all his energy in his intent. He wanted Tracy's wand in his hand. He needed Tracy Davis's wand removed from her. She was a threat to him, and he needed to disarm her. Expelliarmus, Harry repeated to himself over and over again. Expelliarmus. 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 Over and over Harry repeated the incantation in his head, each time going through the wand movement. He was beginning to feel agitated. Just like in his occlumency lessons, Snape had not given the students any idea how to pull off magic wordlessly. There had been no explanation, and no example. It was more than a little frustrating. Still Harry and the rest of the class persevered. And then, it happened. To everyone's complete and utter surprise, Harry disarmed Tracy without speaking. The Slytherin's wand sailed into the air towards Harry, who snatched it out of the air. He held the wand in his hand, looking at it with complete surprise. "Potter!" Snape called out. "Give Davis her wand back. Everyone else, back to the lesson." Harry obliged, tossing the wand back to its owner and preparing to repeat the performance. Harry managed to disarm Tracy 7 more times, each time it got easier. Harry noted that there wasn't really any difference in how he felt when he spoke the incantations opposed to casting silently. It was just a matter of getting used to not saying the incantation out loud. It was almost as if he was relearning how to cast spells. Harry wondered if maybe the teachers should have taught them this from the beginning. When Snape halted the class, Harry saw that he wasn't the only one who had been able to pull off the spell without speaking. Hermione, of course, was able to do it. She was the first person after him to perform the spell. Neville also had just managed, along with Parvati. While Tracy had yet to manage it, Blaise Zabini, Daphne Greengrass, and Malfoy had all managed to disarm their opponents. I wish for those who have managed to work the spell to pair with someone who has also managed the spell. Granger, you will face Zabini, Greengrass and Podil, and Malfoy and Potter. Switch now, Snape said, his eyes lingering on Harry. Harry and Draco faced off against one another just as they had when Lockhart had put together his little dueling club not so many years earlier. Harry prepared himself. He was not about to let Malfoy disarm him. Not now, not ever. Focusing all of his magic, Harry flicked his wand, just as Malfoy did. The spells collided in the middle of the class and exploded in red and orange sparks. Both Malfoy and Harry snapped their wands at each other again with the same result. So intent was Harry on disarming his school rival that he failed to notice the rest of the class cease their work to watch these two bitter enemies go at each other. Again and again their spells collided in a shower of fireworks. Harry was quite surprised at how well Malfoy was performing. Draco Malfoy had never shown that he was very good before now. Then again, Harry noted that until now, Draco had never attempted to actually fight Harry properly. Malfoy had always tried to get Harry when he wasn't paying attention, or the odds seemed to be in his favor. But now, as they tried repeatedly to disarm each other, Harry began to wonder just how good Malfoy really could be and if he might actually pose a real threat of some kind. "Enough!" Snape yelled. "I believe I told you to take turns disarming one another, did I not?" No," Harry said, looking at Snape, and then quickly added, "Sir." Snape glared coldly at Harry, taking a few, what he must have believed to be intimidating steps closer to Harry, who held the defense teacher's gaze. "Excuse me," Snape said, his voice dangerously low. "You said to practice disarming." "You never said anything about taking turns," Sir Harry said quickly. "It's true," Sir Daphne Greengrass said confidently. Snape turned and glared at the blonde Slytherin, who simply shrugged. "Very well." Snape glowered as he turned back to Malfoy and Harry. "You will take turns. Malfoy, you will go first." Harry wanted to protest, but his wand shot out of his hand the moment Snape stepped out from between them. Rage boiled up inside Harry as Malfoy tossed his wand back towards him, giving a very weak toss, so Harry had to walk across the class to retrieve his wand. Harry walked back to his original spot and turned to face Draco. He wondered for a moment how much trouble he would get in if he accidentally destroyed Draco's wand by not catching it, or banishing it through the window. Harry disarmed Draco as easily as he had Tracy Davis, and tossed Malfoy's wand back to him. Draco then disarmed Harry and they went through the motions 5 more times before Snape stopped them again. "Well done, Mr. Malfoy," Snape said. "Take 20 points for the lesson." Harry glared at Snape, while Malfoy gave an appreciative nod. That was when Harry noticed something. Draco had always stared up at Snape as if the greasy bat were some kind of idol. But today, Draco looked almost dismissive of the man. "For your homework, I wish for you to write 12 inches summarizing chapters 1 through 4 in your textbooks for Thursday. You are dismissed." Harry grabbed his bag and, with Hermione next to him, and Ron and Lavender behind them, left the defense class. "That was totally unfair," Lavender said when they were in the corridor. "Harry, you were the first one of us to manage to disarm anybody." "I swear," Draco was whispering. "I never expected Snape to be fair just because he got his dream job," Harry retorted. "I'm just happy he didn't use me as a guinea pig to show off some of his favorite dark spells. Imagine if he had, and you had to protect yourself with silent casting for the first time," Hermione said, horrified. "He's so appalling." "Summarize 4 chapters before Thursday," Ron asked, sounding affronted. "He's evil. What is Dumbledore playing at?" "I think there's more going on than we know," Hermione said flatly. "Hermione, isn't there always?" Harry asked, making them all laugh. When the last student left the class, Snape waved his wand, closing the door. "You can reveal yourself now," he said to no one. Near the back of the class, the wall shimmered and Professor Dumbledore appeared out of thin air. "As you can clearly see, I did not abuse my position or harass Potter." Snape glared at the old man. "No," Dumbledore agreed. "You did not. However, you did show favoritism to young Master Malfoy." "Miss Granger clearly had what I am sure was a very detailed answer to your question, and you humiliated her. And then, you awarded points to Mr. Malfoy and none to Harry, who was the first to cast silently, and with much better results. Not only that, but you widened the house lines by forcing the Slytherins against the Gryffindors. Also, Mr. Malfoy was still whispering the incantation. So, Severus, how many times must we do this? How many times do I need to remind you that Harry is not James? That he is not the boy you perceive him to be? You expect me to believe he has some latent, as yet unseen magical strength that is sure to defeat the Dark Lord?" Snape scoffed. We have already spoken on this matter. Why do you no longer trust me, Severus? Snape looked up, his eyes narrowed to black slits. Because your decisions have been insane. To allow Draco back into the school knowing he is plotting to kill you. Knowing that he's more ruthless than his father was before him. I told you what happened, and yet you stand there convinced we can save him. He does not wish to be saved. Are you so sure? Dumbledore asked. Snape shook his head in exasperation. When did you stop trusting me? Snape replied, making Dumbledore grimace. There is precious little time left to us, Severus. Let's not waste it quarreling. Continue to monitor Mr. Malfoy. Should anything happen, you know what to do. You've yet to allow me a chance to forget it. Should I expect you to be observing my classes for the rest of the term? Snape asked sarcastically. You never know. Dumbledore gave a soft smile before he left Snape alone in his classroom. Susan. The redhead stopped at the sound of her name being called. She and Hannah were leaving the Charms classroom with the intention of meeting their friends for a bit of studying outside before dinner. When Susan turned to see who had called out to her, her beaming smile melted away instantly as Ginny Weasley stood anxiously in front of her. Could I talk to you? Ginny asked morosely. Alone. I can wait here. Hannah offered, but Susan shook her head. Tell Harry I'll be there in a few minutes. Susan said before she followed Ginny a little way down the hall into an empty classroom. I need to apologize to you. Ginny said after she shut the door behind her. I shouldn't have done what I did, but... Why did you kiss Harry? Susan asked, not bothering to disguise the bitterness in her voice. I wish that I could give you a simple answer to that, but it isn't simple. Since I was little, I had heard the story of Harry Potter and how he stopped the Dark Lord. I have had a crush on the hero for as long as one could remember. Then when I was 10, I met him for the first time, though I didn't know it was him at the time. He was this really cute, lost little boy, going to Hogwarts for the first time, and he was just... I can't even explain it. Then I found out he was who he was, and my crush and reality smashed together, and one was hooked. But I never figured that my brain would go on the fritz when I saw him next. I had spent a year reading letters from Ron and the twins all about Harry and things that were happening here at Hogwarts, and my little crush grew to ridiculous levels, but again, I wasn't really aware of it. Then he came to stay with us and I suddenly became this shy, awkward, silly little girl with a hero worship complex. I couldn't even breathe when I was in the same room with him, much less talk to him. And then I started at Hogwarts, and something happened. Something really bad. The diary, right? Susan asked. Ginny's eyes shot up and the question was in her eyes. Harry sort of told me a bit about what happened. Don't worry, I promised not to say anything. Susan said, her anger ebbing a bit. Ginny nodded slowly and mumbled a thank you. I wish that it had never happened, because it just made everything worse. Not just the self-doubt and confusion I was already feeling at being a first year, and not really having any friends, but Harry had to go and save my life. You can imagine what that did to me. If I had been on the edge before, Harry saving me pushed me over. Hard. I was in love, and no one could tell me differently. The problem was, I couldn't even talk to him. Then Hermione, brilliant witch that she is, told me that I needed to learn to relax. Harry would never notice me if I couldn't talk to him. So I backed off. I even started dating in my 3rd year. Neville took me to the Yule Ball, and I started seeing Michael Corner after that. One was becoming a lot more confident in myself, and one was starting to feel like I might be worthy of Harry. We even started talking and becoming friends. But I was still blinded by my crush for him to really pay attention. What do you mean? Susan asked, her curiosity getting the better of her. Even though we were becoming friends, and even now. I'm so ashamed of this. But I still see the boy who lived. I don't know who Harry really is. I've been so wrapped up in this fantasy life, that I still never took the time to get to know the real Harry. But ever since I found out that you two were betrothed, I have been doing a lot of thinking and soul searching. But why did you kiss him? Susan asked irritably. Because I had to know. Ginny replied. I had to know if all the things I convinced myself over the years that I felt were real, or just some really crazy delusion. And? Susan asked. You're a very lucky woman, Susan. Ginny said. If it weren't for the contract, you'd have a real fight on your hands. But, there's nothing I can do to change things now. But I can now get over my feelings. I do care for Harry, very deeply, and it's because I care so deeply that I want him happy. I've seen him with you at his party, and here at school, and between us, I've never seen him smile like he does when he's with you. Like he's just ordinary, which is his greatest desire. To be ordinary. Susan looked confused. Think about it. Everything he's endured, and will likely face in the future. If you were in his place, what would your deepest wish be? Ginny asked. Susan folded her arms across her chest as she pondered this query. She had to admit that she too would probably just want to have some kind of normalcy. I know that the way you two got together wasn't how either of you would have chosen to do so, but you're together now, and you have to understand that you're very lucky. I know that I'm only beginning to see Harry for who he truly is, but I'm also seeing that the real Harry is something much more special than the boy who lived. Ginny sighed. He's a truly courageous and selfless man. I know in my heart that he will spend his every breath loving you with every piece of his soul, if you let him. They sat in silence for a few minutes, Ginny wiping at her stinging eyes as she tried not to break down. So, what are you going to do? Susan asked. I'm dating Dean Thomas. I'm going to try to make a go of it with him. He's a good guy, and I like him. But mostly, I'm just going to try and make myself a better person. Like I said, I did a lot of soul searching over the summer, and I was not happy with myself. One need to be a better friend, and I'd like to be your friend, if you'd let me. Susan stared at Ginny for a long time before shaking her head. I wish I could just forget things, and we could be friends, but what you did really hurt. I understand why now, but it doesn't change things. I understand. Ginny nodded, her eyes cast to the floor. Maybe one day you and I might be friends, but not right now. It's still too fresh in my mind. For now though, I think we can manage to be civil to one another. Ginny gave a weak smile as she offered her hand. It's a better start than I thought I would get. I was sure we'd be hexing each other here. Susan shook Ginny's hand, and the two girls left the class. Susan felt that Ginny had shown great courage in facing up to what she'd done, and entrusting Susan with her secrets. Susan was contemplating a few things Ginny had said as she headed out to the grounds to join up with her friends. While it still made her feel angry that her life had been preordained for her, she knew that things could have been much worse. She could have ended up with a boy who saw the contract as permission to do as he pleased to her. Her aunt had told her one night over the summer that one of the reasons she had allowed Harry to come stay with him was to see what kind of person he was. Amelia had explained that in some betrothals, the boy would abuse his bride-to-be, even raping them in some instances. Although, in those cases, the man had been significantly older. Harry was her age, and pretty much at her level when it came to intimacy experience. Though Susan pretty much knew she had a bit more experience than Harry, thanks in large part to a few games of Truth or Dare the previous year. Susan didn't think anyone had ever had their hand in his underwear. Susan felt herself blush as she remembered that particular dare. Susan was pleased with her situation, all things considered. She and Harry would be able to grow together, and knowing they would be together no matter what did take a lot of pressure off of them both. If they chose to become more intimate, it would be their choice. Not because they were worried of losing the other or some other silly reason that other teens worried about. They could also forge a much deeper emotional connection. They would never have to put up false bravado to impress or keep up some phony effigy of themselves. They could be real and completely honest with each other. They were actually blessed. As Susan stepped out into the late afternoon sun and spotted her friends waiting for her down by the lake, she sought Harry, spotting his messy black hair immediately. A smile burst forth and she sped her pace. A moment later she was wrapping her arms around his neck, pulling herself up a bit to meet his lips with hers. She kissed him soundly for a few moments, while her friends looked on, some sniggering, others sighing. She didn't care. They'd all have to get used to it, because Harry was hers, and she knew as she tasted him that Ginny Weasley had been right. Susan was lucky. And Susan knew now that she would fight to keep things that way. What was that for? Harry whispered when Susan finally released him. I'm just happy to see you. Susan smiled coyly. Harry gave her one of his lopsided grins, and she reached up to brush some of his fringe off his forehead, lightly touching his lightning-bolt scar. Harry sighed lightly at her touch and Susan smiled softly. Taking his hand in hers, she and the rest of their group took seats under the oak tree to begin comparing notes from the day's classes. Please like and subscribe.